I'm Don Ellis, and I'm sitting here with George Harrison, who has done something really extraordinary. And I'd like to ask you, I've seen this tape of a concert you did with Ravi Shankar and friends in Albert Hall in London, and it's something that I've never heard, and I've been into Indian music for a good number of years, and it's with all sorts of ensemble and things that I've never experienced in Indian music. And what's it all about?
Yeah, well, apart from the people who are just into Ravi Shankar music or the various soloists from India, there's a lot of people who still think about it as, you know, just a sitar or just this, you know, just two people playing. There's never been an opportunity to see like an orchestra, which in Western music, you know, you can see soloists or you can see orchestras. I came across this piece of music Ravi had written long before I'd met him, that he performed once in Bombay, which was called Navarasaranga, which used vocalists, violin players, flute players, a whole lot of percussion players. It was like an orchestra, small orchestra. And since that time, I was trying to figure out a way of how to bring all these people to the West and for him to make special compositions in order to maybe open up the concept the Western audiences have on Indian music.
There are so many Indian musicians here. How did it happen that you got them all in one place at the same time?
First of all, we brought them to England, 16, 17 musicians, brought them to England. He composed the music mainly each day in the evening before the rehearsal or on his way out. See, he works like very spontaneous. And so he'll have the people sitting down there, have an idea and give each one their part and then count it off, and everybody comes in. You think it's going to sound crazy, but it all fits. And if one person plays the wrong note, out of 16 people, Ravi's got such an ear, he pick it up straight away. So most of this has been composed right on the spot, then arranged and rehearsed for a very short time. We didn't have too much time. And then they played the Albert Hall and a tour which went to Paris and Copenhagen and Germany, just around Europe.
In this first piece, there's a rhythmical cycle of 7, 3, 2, 2. And one of the things I find most exciting about it is to follow the pattern that you hear on the little finger cymbals, long, short, short, and then relate what, for example, the drummers are doing to that pattern. And when you do that, you hear all these cross rhythms and incredible things that they're doing, which, in my opinion, are far beyond the capabilities of the best Western drummer that I've ever heard. And when you're aware of this going on, it just becomes an absolutely thrilling and incredible experience. You were one of the first people that I know of, especially in the pop field, to get into Indian music. How did this come about?
I met Ravi. From that point on, it was mainly the involvement with him that drew me more and more into the music.
Did you study with him?
Well, sort of, yeah. I spent a lot of time, whenever I could, just practicing. And the great thing for me was that in pop music, I never had any teacher. No, I never learned piano, never learned to read, I never learned how to play the guitar, actually. There was never anybody who's, you know, to play basic scales. So this was the first time I ever got involved with seriously trying to start at the first point, which was just playing scales. And the whole thing gave me a bit of discipline, which I'd never had before. But it was mainly through him, you see, because during that period I'd been around and met all kinds of people, musicians and film stars and various heavyweight people, but I don't know, there was always something that wasn't impressing me, you know? And he was so intriguing because he's such a little person and yet had so much strength and so much power that I became so attracted to the music then through the person. And it was the deeper I got into it, just the more there was, you know?
Well, as we all know, this was like probably at the same time when the Beatles were at their peak of popularity.
Who?
How did your fellow compatriots in that group feel about Indian music and your involvement in it?
Well, the very first time Ravi played at home. This was the first day I'd ever had a lesson from him. They were all invited over, and in the evening he played with Alaraka and just played a little concert to us and a few friends. And I think, I mean, they were amazed, and I'm sure they really got into it. I mean, Ringo in particular just couldn't believe it. In fact, it had the opposite effect on Ringo, because for me, I was just so intrigued just to try and grasp a little bit of it, and mainly the sitar for me, the stringed instrument, it was so flexible, you know, when you get into blues and all those sort of styles, the sitar, just the way it's constructed, well, all their instruments actually, the construction of them and the whole ancientness of them, the instruments have been developed, so you can do certain things on them which you just can't do on Western instruments. And likewise with the drums, Ringo just sat there and watched Alaraka, and then he ran a mile. You know, he just didn't want to go near them, you know?
Oh, I mean, it has to be a mind-blowing experience.
Because if you see it this close, that's the funny thing with the sitar. If you watch a concert and you can hear the sitar or you hear a record, but if you sit up this close, it's just amazing, because it's like an orchestra in itself, all these sympathetic strings, you know? Yeah. You just hit one note and this whole orchestra comes out of there. And it actually just looks, I suppose with any master of anything, is a person who makes something look very simple. And a lot of the time, with Alaraka playing, it just looks as though he's doing this, and Ravi's just doing this. But what's coming out is unbelievable.
Leads us into this next piece very well, as a matter of fact, because this one I found to be probably one of the most extraordinary pieces I've ever heard. To me, there's a very definite influence from the West in it. I hear counterpoint, I hear some harmonies. It combines the vocal thing with the instrumental and the rhythmic, and it's sort of all in one, and it's light, it's happy.
The swing will sing.
Yeah, it's everything, and it's one of the most enjoyable things I've ever heard.
And the people got into in the 60s, which became like an indie music fad, sitar boom. But what happened, well, during that period, I never played Western music, either to listen to or to play. Never touched the guitar for 3 years.
You went
apart from, just apart from when I go and play on a session just to make an album, then I'd play. But I was always playing the sitar. And after hearing so many of these musicians in India, I realized I was not going to get anywhere as a sitar player. I was also forgetting everything about where I was coming from, and it just, as naturally as I got into it, I got back out of it, in as much as I decided I'm going to be a pop musician. That's really what I am. And what happened also was that with the sitar boom, there was thousands of people coming to concerts, because Ravi had been working for years trying to establish Indian music. There was a big boom, and then it leveled back out again, and then it took him another 2 years in order to re-establish himself. The good thing that came from that was that it did expose so many more people to the music, and they were much more serious about it. By the time the boom had disappeared, and the people who were left were actually real lovers of the music with a deeper understanding.
Ravi made some statements which were rather played up in the press at the time about he didn't want people to come to his concert getting spaced out on drugs. If they wanted to hear Indian music, he wanted them sober. And do you think that turned off a lot of, because at that time a lot of people were into drugs?
Well, a lot of people get turned off by a lot of things. He always felt cheated by the audience, but also in where he's coming from, I mean, it's such a part, it's also part of the spiritual life in India. The classical music and all those ragas are going so deep that and the training to be a musician is, it's a spiritual training. You know, you get up and very early in the morning, take your bath, do your yoga and say your prayers, and then practice for 3 hours, and then you have your coffee, you know. So it's like with such dedication that, you know, that's why he'd always expect people to have a little respect for it. I mean, I think that's the most difficult thing in the West, because everybody's, you know, just wants to boogie. And it's hard for them to understand exactly where it's coming from. But you know, one of the things that impressed me is just concerning the overall thing of the music was the very first lesson I had. We were playing, I was learning scales, and the telephone rang. I put the sitar down on the floor and stood up and went to go out to answer the phone, and I picked my foot up to step over, and he went bang. So the first thing you learn is to have respect for the instrument. And that's fantastic, you know. It takes respect in order to appreciate fully anything, you know?
Yes. Well, in this piece that is the finale that we're about to hear, it's based on a lot of folk rhythms, and I think the inspiration came from folk things. Isn't this sort of common at the end of a concert to get very light and happy then again, after all this deep, intense stuff, then just sort of let it flow? I think I really congratulate you for doing something that is absolutely extraordinary and couldn't have taken place without you.
Good, well, let's do it again sometime.
I'm ready.
Thank you and everybody for enjoying it.